Imagine the weight of a silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, waiting silence. The silence of a cradle that no longer rocks. The silence of a small room where the only sound is the ragged breath of a mother praying to a God who does not seem to listen. This is the silence that settled over the villages of the Black Forest in the long, dark years of the 18th and 19th centuries. A silence born from a terrifyingly common tragedy. And in the face of such unbearable loss, the human mind does what it must. It conjures a monster. Because sometimes it is easier to believe your child was stolen by a fiend than to accept that they were simply taken by the cold. Our story begins in a place like 1,000 others, a small farming village clinging to the edge of the wilderness. Here, in 1782, lived a carpenter named Klaus and his wife, Anya. Their world was one of rough-hewn timber, of soil that yielded its bounty only through back-breaking labor, and of a faith so intertwined with older, darker beliefs that the line between prayer and superstition was blurred beyond recognition. Their pride and joy was their son, Matthias, a boy of 3 with hair the color of wheat, and a laugh that, his mother would later swear, could make the fire in the hearth burn brighter. But one morning in late autumn, that laugh was gone. Matthias did not wake with his usual chatter. He was listless, his skin pale and waxy. He would not eat the broth Anya desperately spooned towards his lips. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, were dull and distant, seeming to look at something in the far corner of the room that his parents could not see. "Klaus, look at his eyes. They are not his eyes." Klaus, a practical man whose world was built with solid wood and sturdy nails, dismissed it at first. "It is a fever, woman. He will be well by Sunday." But Sunday came, and Matthias was worse. He had begun to make a sound, a low, guttural humming that was entirely alien. The village midwife, old Marta, was summoned. Her hands, gnarled like the roots of the forest, traced the boy's fevered brow. She peered into his vacant eyes, and her own filled with a dread that had nothing to do with medicine.
"The child, he is cold. Colder than the fever should make him. His appetite is gone for our food. He does not respond to his mother's voice. Klaus, this is not your son." The word hung in the smoky air of the cottage, unspoken but understood. Wechselbalg, Changeling. It was an ancient belief, a piece of folklore as old as the hills themselves. The idea that malicious forest spirits, the kobolds or the Erlking, would covet a human child for its beauty or its vitality. They would sneak into a home and with a breath of magic swap the healthy infant for one of their own sickly, ancient kin. The thing left in the cradle looked like your child, but it was a hollow, wasting copy. A cruel, parasitic imitation that would slowly fade and die, draining the life and happiness from the household. And why? As a mockery of humanity, as a sick game for creatures of the deep wood. For Anya, the theory was a perverse comfort. It meant her real son, her bright Matthias, was still alive. He was out there, in the vast, impenetrable green of the Black Forest, perhaps being raised by the fair folk in a hollow hill. It was a nightmare, but a nightmare with hope. The alternative, that this wasting, silent child was truly her boy, claimed by some mundane, inexplicable illness, was a despair too profound to bear.
But the folklore provided more than just an explanation. It provided remedies, desperate remedies. Klaus, his heart hardening with a grim resolve, took the advice of the village elders. One evening, as the thing that looked like Matthias lay listless in its cot, Klaus began to brew a pot of coffee. But this was no ordinary coffee. He made it with bitter, acrid grounds, boiling it until the steam filled the cottage with a pungent, choking smell. The old tales said a changeling, being an ancient creature, would be shocked by the intensity of such a modern concoction. It would sit up and speak with the voice of an old man, revealing its true nature. Klaus held the steaming cup near the child's face. The boy, the thing, stirred. Its eyes fluttered open, and for a moment Klaus's heart leapt. But then it let out a thin, reedy wail, a sound of pure distress that held no words, only terror. Anya rushed from the other room, her face a mask of horror, and shoved the cup away, scalding liquid splattering across the dirt floor. "Stop it! You are hurting him! Can you not see you are hurting him?" The coffee had failed. The next test was more brutal. Old Marta advised them to take the child to the edge of the woods to a specific lightning-blasted oak tree said to be a gateway to the other world. They were to lay the child at its roots and turn their backs, walking away without a single glance. If it was a changeling, the true parents would come to reclaim their own, and in their shame, return the human child. The following dusk, a small, solemn procession left the village. Klaus, carrying a bundled, silent Matthias, Anya, her face pale and streaked with silent tears, and a few of the stern-faced elders carrying torches that fought back the encroaching gloom. The forest seemed to watch them, a wall of silent, judging sentinels. They reached the scorched oak, its branches like skeletal claws against the twilight sky. Klaus, his hands shaking, laid the small, warm bundle amongst the thick, gnarled roots. "Take your thing. Give me back my son." They turned. They walked back towards the distant, flickering lights of the village. And with every step, Anya felt a piece of her soul being torn away. The sound that escaped her lips was not a sob, but a low, animal keen of agony. They waited all night in their cottage, listening for a cry, for a familiar small knock at the door. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the cracks in the timber, sounding like a child's lonely cry. At first light, Klaus ran back to the oak. The bundle was still there. The child was still breathing, its chest rising and falling in shallow, fragile breaths. It was colder now, and its humming had stopped, replaced by a profound, unnerving silence. He had been abandoned by the human world, and now, it seemed, by the fairy world as well. He picked up his son, for what else could he do, and carried the limp, chilling form back home. This was the terrible crossroads where folklore curdled into true horror. If the gentle methods of exposure and trickery failed, the old stories whispered of a final, dreadful solution. To force the supernatural hand, one had to threaten the changeling. To make the household so inhospitable, so terrifying, that the fiendish parents would have no choice but to return and reclaim their own. This is where the shadow of the Kinderfresser, the child eater, begins to fall across our story. For some, the Kinderfresser was not a separate entity, but a role a desperate parent was forced to play. The belief was that if you threatened the changeling with utter annihilation, the true child would be saved.
We have records chilling in their bureaucratic dryness, from church ledgers and town council minutes from the 1740s in Württemberg, not far from the Black Forest. An inquest into the death of a child, where the parents testified they had placed the changeling on a hot shovel to make it speak. Another case from 1802 in Bavaria, where a woman was tried for neglect after following a cunning man's advice to leave a sickly infant out in the freezing rain to break the fairy's spell. In the cottage, despair had frozen into a grim shared resolve. Anya, who had once defended the child from the coffee, now looked at it with hollow eyes. This was not her Matthias. This thing had stolen her son's face. It had to be shunned. It had to be made to leave. On the advice of the elders, they built the fire in the hearth higher than it had been, until the stones of the fireplace glowed with heat. The air in the cottage shimmered. Klaus took the heavy, iron-fired shovel used for baking bread and held it in the flames until the metal glowed a dull, angry red.
The thing in the cradle began to stir, as if sensing the shift in intention. It let out a mewling sound, a pathetic, weak noise. "Give me back my son. Give me back my son."
He did not intend to touch the child with it. The folklore was clear. The threat was the key. The performance of violence was meant to summon the hidden audience. He was acting out the part of the ultimate monster, the Kinderfresser, to scare the real monsters. He drew the glowing shovel from the fire, its heat washing over the room. He took a step towards the cradle. And in that moment, the child's eyes, Matthias's eyes, snapped open. They were no longer vacant. They were wide with a primal, understanding terror. It saw the glowing iron. It saw the face of the man it called father, twisted by fear and rage into something unrecognizable. It let out a single, piercing, perfectly human shriek of utter fear. And from the forest, just outside the window, came an answering sound. Not a shriek, but a deep, guttural, grinding roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cottage. It was a sound that belonged to no wolf, no bear, no natural beast of the wood. It was a sound of ancient, predatory hunger. Klaus froze, the shovel dropping from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the stone hearth. Anya screamed, clutching at her husband. The sound from the forest faded, leaving a silence more profound and more terrifying than any that had come before. The child in the cradle was now silent again, but its eyes were fixed on the window, a faint, knowing smile on its pale lips. The line between the monster you perform and the monster that answers is a thin one. And in the deep, dark woods of the human heart and of the Black Forest, sometimes that line vanishes altogether. The next morning, the child was dead. The village preacher wrote in the parish ledger, "Matthias, son of Klaus the carpenter, taken by a sudden fever. God have mercy on his soul." There was no mention of glowing shovels, of guttural roars from the forest. The official record is always sane, always clean. It is the stories whispered by the fire that hold the messy, terrible truth. The story of Klaus and Anya is a composite, but it is built from 1,000 real tragedies. The Changeling myth was a cultural coping mechanism, a narrative framework imposed on the terrifying randomness of disease and death. In an era before germ theory, when conditions like failure to thrive, cerebral palsy, cystic fibrosis, or a dozen other childhood illnesses were utterly incomprehensible, the Changeling offered a reason, a villain. And the Kinderfresser? He is the ultimate embodiment of that villain. But he is also the dark mirror of that desperation. He is the story that says, your child is not dead, he is stolen. And he is the story that says, to get him back, you must be willing to become a monster yourself. The fiends in the forest were real. They were the hunger, the poverty, the bacteria, the unshakable grief. But by giving them a name and a form, our ancestors believed they could be fought. They could be outwitted. They could be appeased. The silent children of the Black Forest were victims twice over. First, of the harsh realities of 18th and 19th century life, and second, of the terrifying, beautiful, and sometimes brutal stories we tell to make sense of a world that often makes no sense at all. The woods are quieter now. The cradles are, for most, safer. But the silence they fear today is a different one. And the monsters have simply learned to wear new faces.